Hi there, in this video we're going to take a few minutes to look at the concept of economic losses. Now, economic losses are also known as subnormal profit, and that happens when the price the firm is charging per unit is lower than the cost per unit. Now, in some cases, losses can be temporary. It could be that there's a short-term increase in a business's fixed or variable costs, or a fall in revenues caused by a shift in demand. We'll look at that diagrammatically in a second or two. But if economic losses are sustained over time, well, this can threaten the commercial viability of a business. Indeed, this might lead to a firm cutting back on production, on the number of jobs, number of people employed, and critically also on capital investment. Or the business may decide to shut down some parts of the business. They might close a retail outlet, for example, or a factory. Even in extreme circumstances, high losses may cause a firm to leave the industry. So here's a diagram showing how a firm can move from profit to loss. Initially, at output Q1, a profit maximizing firm, this firm is making a profit at price P1 because at price P1 that's higher than the cost per unit C1, so the level of profit is shown here by this shaded area. This firm is making a narrow profit because the price per unit is above the cost per unit. However, if there's an inward shift of demand, shown here, fallen demand from AR to AR2, don't forget there's a marginal revenue curve that goes with that. So an inward shift of demand causes a contraction of output from Q1 to Q2. The price the firm can now charge is lower at P2 because the demand curve is shifted to the left. And now this price is lower than cost per unit C2, which implies the firm is now making an economic loss because the price per unit average revenue is lower than the average cost. And there's the total areas of losses, Q2 multiplied by the gap between P2 and C2, total economic loss. Well, there are lots of different causes of business losses. One could be an economic downturn, in particular, obviously, a recession. Recessions can significantly affect a firm's profitability, and that's particularly true for firms whose demand is highly cyclical. It rises and falls with the economic cycle, and that's linked to the income elasticity of demand for the product. Firms whose goods and services have a highly positive income elasticity of demand will see a cyclical fluctuation in their demand. Losses could be caused by rising costs, high variable costs, for example, or high overhead costs, the fixed costs, meaning they can't generate enough revenue to cover their costs. And critically, as we'll see, external shocks can have a big effect. So many businesses, not just in the UK, but around the world, saw profits turn to loss during the pandemic. And afterwards, of course, during the surge in operating costs in 2022, 2023, especially the rise in interest payments, a fixed cost for most businesses, and energy costs, a variable cost. So the pandemic clearly had a big impact on revenues and profits for many businesses across many different sectors. The hospitality and tourism sector clearly suffered with travel restrictions and reduced demand, and obviously events and entertainment businesses were hit really hard with lockdown, COVID restrictions. Concerts, festivals, live events, many were cancelled or postponed. And the aviation and transport sectors obviously hit very hard by the pandemic. Indeed, look at the net profits of commercial airlines in Europe from 2013 to 2022. There's a forecast in there of a return to profit, but you can see the collapse in the profitability of commercial airlines during the lockdown years of 2020, 2021, lagging into 2022. It's only back in 23 that the net profit, that's overall of all airlines, has now returned positive. British Airways is a really good example there. This chart shows their annual operating profit, and again they moved from rising profits during the 2011 to 2019 to a big deep loss, a total operating loss in excess of £5.5 billion pounds, over those 2 years. Whitbread is a multinational leisure company, best known for the owner being the hotel brand Premier Inn, and again they were a highly profitable business that moved from profit to economic loss in 2020-21. The cinemas were another good example, often used by examiners as case studies. So many cinemas were forced to close for many months or even longer because of lockdown. And even when they reopened, there was a hesitancy amongst consumers to go out in public. So it took time for attendance to recover. Many major film releases were delayed or moved to streaming services, further hurting cinemas. And of course, we've had increased competition in the market from streaming services, including Netflix and Hulu. So there's the market for UK cinema admissions in the UK. And you can see how bad a year 2020 was. After a period of relative growth, there was a sharp shock to the industry. Partial recovery. Cineworld is a really good example of a business which really struggled during the pandemic there. So there we go, a quick look at the economic losses that businesses can often sustain. Be aware of the causes as well as the consequences and how perhaps businesses can turn these things around faced with an economic loss. Thanks for joining in. Take care, stay safe, stay positive, and see you sometime soon.